passage. Matthew chapter 12, verses 38 to 43. Verses 38 to 43. Let us read in a loud voice. 1 to go. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." He answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here. When an impure, that's it. Okay, so we read verses 38 to 42. Okay, have you heard about this kind of phrase? The bad workman blames the tools. So people make excuses for the things, right? So usually in the many cases, the reason we fail to do what we should have done is actually lies in us. On the other hand, many cases when we end up doing the things we shouldn't do, actually there lies in us, in our hearts as well. So now in our story, those Pharisees and teachers of the law, they came and then they were asking for a sign. Jesus gave us another sign. Okay? But Jesus is pointing out that you are making excuses. What is the sign? Sign confirmed things. Sign actually reveals what truly it is. It reveals, confirms something. So in the Old Testament, we can see lots of signs. For example, for Moses, God gave a sign. His staff turned into a serpent. And then when he put his hands into his, bosom, and then when he came out of it, and then it was leprous, and then it was healed again, it was a sign. What kind of sign? God called him Moses as his servant. And then we have another sign. When you look at Gideon, he came to trust in God through the sign of a fleece. Okay, becoming wet through during the night. And the second day, it was remaining dry while all the ground around it wet. So the sign appear in the Old Testament. Yeah? So maybe those Pharisees and teachers of the law, they wanted to see the sign and they wanted to believe in Jesus. Is that the reason why they're asking for a sign? But when we look at Jesus' response, we can get to know, no, that's not the reason why they are asking for a sign. They are actually making excuses. Okay? Jesus calls them a wicked and adulterous generation. He's using this term, wicked, evil. Okay? Last week, actually, we were talking about a really important idea. Why they were blamed to commit a sin, unforgivable sin. Yeah? Jesus said that. Why is that so? Because they constantly, habitually, intentionally, they followed their evil desire. Every choices, they followed their evil desire. Think about it. When Jesus' disciples, they were hungry, they ate some grains. instead of showing mercy to them, the Pharisees, they followed their evil desire. What desire? They wanted to keep their privilege. They wanted to keep their authority. They wanted to keep their benefits over people. So Jesus' authority and his disciples, they are the threatening to them. So that they actually blamed Jesus' disciples to break the Sabbath. And then we learned about another story. We learned about a withered hand man. Jesus healed a man. The Pharisees, they allow a sheep to be saved from a pit on Sabbath. Why? They think the material loss is so big. But they didn't consider a brother's suffering with the withered hand. They valued more the sheep, material possessions than their neighbor's suffering. They followed their evil desire. And then last week we learned about when Jesus casted out the demons from a poor brother, neighbor, they blamed Jesus. You casted out demons with the power of Satan. They wanted to make Jesus' authority less. So they blamed Jesus to cast out demons with the power of Satan. So at the end of the story, Jesus said, your sin is unforgivable. Why? They stored evil again and again and again. What was stored in them is coming out of their mouth. When they blamed Jesus casting out demons with the power of Satan, that is just a sign who they are. Okay? The tree's fruits shows what kind of tree it is. What comes out of their mouths shows who they are. They chose Satan's side instead of Jesus's. So their heart was evil as the consequence of their constant choices. It's not a one mistake. It was constant, habitual, intentional choices. At the end of all those choices, as a consequence of it, they became the evil people. Their identity was evil people. They followed their evil desires again and again. So now Jesus is calling them evil because Jesus knew their hearts. What was their intention when they were asking for a sign? They wanted to make excuse to reject Jesus. They were trying to kill Jesus. They were seeking for another reason to kill Jesus. Now Jesus is calling them adulterous. This term is used in the Old Testament. Actually, God called his people Israel adulterous. Why? Because they abandoned the love and loyalty to God. Okay? God said, you are my wife. We, each other, God and his people, we should love each other. But his people, Israel, they abandoned that love, that loyalty. Instead, they followed lots of other gods of the people in this world. Because those gods, they promised prosperity, victory. So they followed other gods. Like cheating. So Jesus, no, God actually called his people adulterous. They actually treated God, they only wanted to exploit God's power to get what they want. Those people were called adulterous. Okay? Without no pure love, without no pure heart, they only wanted God's power. So now Jesus is saying that you are adulterous generation, which means those Pharisees, they wanted a certain version of kingdom to keep their authority, their privilege, their benefit, their respect. That kind of a kingdom they were looking for. Jesus is saying that you are adulterous people. You only want to exploit the power of God. They did not have any intention to put aside their own desire, their own experience, their own thoughts. So now Jesus is saying that to you, I can give you only the sign of Jonah. What kind of person Jonah was? Jonah, he was saved from the belly of a fish after 3 days and 3 nights. And then when he proclaimed the gospel to the Gentiles in Nineveh, the people repented. Now Jesus is saying that will be like Jonah. So Jesus is talking about his death on the cross and then his resurrection from the death. So Jesus is saying that this is the final sign. If you cannot believe in me, if you cannot follow the kingdom of mine, even after you see this sign of Jonah, Jesus' death and resurrection, this is the final and the only sign that you can have. If you cannot believe in me and follow my kingdom after this sign, there's no hope. You cannot avoid the judgment. And then Jesus is saying another sign. He's talking about the sign of Solomon, the queen of the south, the queen of Sheba. She came from the end of the earth to meet whom? To meet Solomon. Why? At that time, Solomon was considered as the most wise person in the world. So the queen wanted to listen to his wisdom. Solomon was teaching what kind of law God's is, and then what kind of life his people should live according to God's will. Solomon taught that. And the queen of Sheba, she came to listen to it. And now, what is Jesus talking about? He's talking about his own teaching. There is something bigger than Solomon is here. Jesus is saying that even Queen of Sheba, she came from the end of the earth for Solomon's wisdom, but I am teaching what kind of a kingdom God's kingdom is. What kind of principles his people should live accordingly. So here, Jesus is saying about those 2 signs. Let me ask you, Yuna, if a person, Yuna, see a miracle, okay, really, really amazing miracle, that person can get to know Jesus, and then that person can get a stronger faith through the miracle? How do you think? Yeah? That miracle is really supernatural. No human being can do it. So a person observe that kind of miracle that can help him to have the strong faith in Jesus, to know him better. The answer is yes and no. There are some people who observe those kind of miracles. There are some Christians who experience miraculous healings from really, really bad diseases. Yeah, there are. But the thing is, the miracle itself cannot make people to have stronger faith or leading them to know Jesus better. Why? When people begin to focus on miracle itself, they become the people who are pursuing miracles only. Here in our passage, Jesus is pointing out, Jesus is making this clear that the only sign, the strongest, the best of all, Jesus' death and resurrection. That's the only sign that people can have. So now Jesus is saying that through this sign, you can get to know me. You can come to God. You can get the gospel. You can participate in my kingdom. And then the other sign, think about it. Jesus is talking about the Solomon's wisdom. And then he's talking about better than that. Jesus taught all the wisdom of his kingdom is in our Bible. Jesus is saying that through those wisdom, you can get to know me. You can get to participate in the kingdom of mine. So now let us wrap up our passage today. We were learning about the deepest heart of the Pharisees. Why those people turned into those kind of evil and adulterous people? Because they kept following their evil desire. They couldn't give up their benefits, their strong desires. Yeah? Their desire toward the authority and benefits and security and happiness in this world. When they kept following it, at the end, they became those evil and adulterous people. They were criticized by Jesus. So now we were learning about those two biggest signs of all that God has given to us. One of all is Jesus' death and resurrection. Every day of our life, we can come to the throne of grace. We can meet Jesus' cross in front of it. When we come too close to God, we can meet that grace every moment. And then the other side, he was talking about his wisdom inside of our Bible. He taught his wisdom. He taught everything about the kingdom. So every day we read this Bible, we can get the core wisdom of his kingdom. Okay? So let us pray. Remember today's message.